Hello and welcome to the prison your dad made in your basement. Can you please bring me some food? It's been weeks. Hi everybody, my name's King Noose Meme. I asked you guys what show I should talk about and of course Goosebumps won. But shockingly, Perfect School won the episode poll. It's been recommended to me a ton here recently, but I thought it would have lost to Terror Tower for sure. That's like an iconic episode. Perfect School is the 11th and 12th episode of the 3rd season of Goosebumps, and it is based off of the short story called The Perfect School. In the book, even more tells to give you Goosebumps. The same book that has the story Don't Wake Mummy, which also was turned into an episode in season 2. The Tales books are just short stories, so most of the time, if they make an episode about one of the stories, they change a lot and add things to fill some time just to make a single episode. For example, the Haunted House game episode has nothing to do with the story. The episode follows some kids who are trapped in a board game, kind of like Jumanji. The story follows kids who are playing a board game, but as they play, the things that happen to them in the game happen to them in real life. Kinda like Jumanji. The premise is still there, but the episode made it more interesting and way more fun. But somehow they're able to make Perfect School a 2-part episode, which is shocking because the story itself is only 13 pages long. It was originally going to be a 1-part episode with the initial cut being about 38 minutes long, but the producers saw huge potential in the episode and they believed that the concept was suspenseful enough, so they shot a few extra scenes and turned it into a 2-part episode. And they actually added a lot onto Stein's original story and made it better. R.L. Stein himself says that this is one of the best adaptations of his work yet. It aired on November 15th in 1997, and it was written by Scott Peters, who also wrote for shows like Are You Afraid of the Dark, Beyond Belief, and The Outer Limits. And it was directed by channel veteran Ron Oliver, who has directed so many episodes of Goosebumps, and The Haunting Hour, and Are You Afraid of the Dark, and The Nightmare Room, and the Mostly Ghostly movies, and this. The episode was a part of The Ultimate Goosebumps, a rebrand for the 3rd season, which they did because the Goosebumps saturation was at its peak at that point, and they were trying to keep kids' attention on the show by saying the 3rd season was scarier than the other seasons. Even though it's really not. I mean, the 3rd season has some of the goofiest episodes in the whole series, and some of the worst. You're telling me that The Barking Ghost, Strain Peas, and Don't Go to Sleep are scarier and more intense than Werewolf of Fever Swamp, The Scarecrow Walks at Midnight, and Welcome to Camp Nightmare? Let's be real here. But even though most of the season is pretty goofy, this episode is a little bit of an outlier. But I've got a long episode to talk about, so let's quit yapping and get into it. The episode starts at night at the spooky, ominous house. Inside the house, we see a boy named Riley cowering under his bedsheets from a mysterious voice that eerily calls out to him through his vents. The mysterious person cuts the power to the house. Then we cut to Riley's parents, Howard and Paula. They decided to try and have a fun date night, but they're cutting their date night short because Paula just has a feeling that something is wrong at the house, even if they've only been gone for about an hour.
What could go wrong in an hour and a half?
Famous last words, huh? Back at the house, the mysterious figure creeps their way up the stairs and closer to Riley's room. To prepare for the intruder, Riley has decided to arm himself with a plastic bowling pin. What are you gonna do, strike him on the head? Oh, what is that? The intruder opens the door and creepily tells Riley, "You're next." But luckily, his parents come home just in time to reveal that the intruder was his big brother, Brian. Then we smash cut to the next day, and Brian's parents are tired of his shenanigans and decide to send him away to a reforming school. But not just any reforming school, the Perfect School.
The Perfect School. Why settle for anything less than perfect?
That is not what the brochure says at all. It very clearly says, the Perfect School. With perfection, all things are possible. Maybe he'll learn how to read at this new school. When the bus finally pulls up, Brian tries his best to apologize to his parents again in hopes that they'll change their minds, but that doesn't work. So on the bus he goes, and all the kids on there look like nerds. Isn't this school for like bad kids? It looks like they receive swirlies, not dish them out. Brian decides to sit next to the only somewhat cool-looking kid on the bus, who's reading an issue of Giant Robot, which is a magazine for Asian and Asian American pop culture. Also a favorite of director Ron Oliver. The kid's name is CJ, and him and Brian become pretty fast friends. It was kind of one of those situations where it's like, hey, you cool? Yeah, I'm cool. All right, sick. Let's be friends. Man, friendship was so easy as a kid. Brian asks about this nerd sitting across from him, and CJ really doesn't know anything about him besides his name being Joe. And apparently Joe is pretty secretive. Finally, they make it to the Perfect School, and immediately it feels more like a prison than a school. And instantly the headmaster randomly targets CJ, Brian, and Joe for no reason at all. I'm not kidding.
You three. Stand where you are.
What was that? Why'd you say you three and then just take CJ's magazine? Shouldn't you have said you Give me that magazine. That would have made more sense. Anyways, the headmaster makes the kids stand in a perfect line and stay silent as he returns a perfect boy back to his parents, forcing the other guys to watch the very awkward and strange interaction. Then they all single-filedly head into another room where they are forced to give up all of their possessions. Watches, combs, glasses, retainers? Brian gets a little bored waiting in line, so he decides to pick a fight with this kid who's mopping the floor. They get into a small little tussle, but somehow Brian doesn't get into trouble. But this kid named Billy Brown is threatened to have his program accelerated, which means nothing to you guys right now, but it will here very soon. Also, the kid's name was Billy Brown, which is probably a reference to half of the iconic duo Billy Brown and Dan Angel, who are writers for this show and many other of R.L. Stine's works. He's also played by David Rommel, and he was Mike in my favorite episode, Welcome to Camp Nightmare. After Billy gets in trouble and is carried away by the Guardians, the headmaster tells the boys that from here on out, they aren't allowed to do anything without permission. They are to do what they are told when they are told. They aren't allowed to speak unless they're spoken to. They cannot move unless they are directed to do so. Basically, they're stripping these kids of all their rights to make the perfect version of them. Now let's take a small break to talk about a couple of the actors real quick. Brian is played by Sean Roberts, and sadly he isn't in another episode of Goosebumps, but he is in a few of the Resident Evil movies as Albert Wesker, and you can find him in the first X-Men movie where he promptly dies because Rogue kisses him, which is kind of awesome. Brian's dad, Howard, is played by Malcolm Stewart, and he's been in a ton of stuff like The Twilight Zone, The X-Files, Supernatural, and ironically, he was the dad to Peter and Judy in the movie Jumanji, which is kind of weird because I mentioned Jumanji earlier. What's that sound? Ah! We cut to the next day and at lunch, and the boys are closely monitored as they eat their food to ensure that they eat all of it correctly and they don't share any food at all. But at least they have actual food here. In the story, they have like gross, lumpy gray sludge. Kind of like that stuff from The Tale of the Hatching and Are You Afraid of the Dark. Brian notices that the dude he got in a little scuffle with the day before isn't at the lunch table, which has the boys a little scared and concerned about what happened to him and what could happen to them. In their first day of class, the boys have to take a strange aptitude test to try and better figure out what kind of person they are, which wouldn't be so bad normally, but the test is a literal book and they aren't allowed to leave until they finished it completely, all while being monitored by these teachers, which they call guardians, who are pretty harsh on the kids and don't give them any special treatment. But strangely, they are starting to take a liking to Brian's pal Joe. That night, as Brian and Joe scrub the entry stairs with toothbrushes, okay, this is just getting cruel at this point. What have they done? They haven't done anything wrong. They're doing like prison punishment even though they haven't done anything at all. Anyways, Brian is approached by Billy, who apologizes to Brian for their little scuffle the day before. And he tells him that they did in fact accelerate his program and he'll be leaving very soon. Both of the guys find the intense change in his demeanor kind of creepy. In just a single day, he went from a hot-headed kid to a completely calm and respectful person. And they're not sure exactly what happened to him or how they got him that way, but they sure as hell don't want it to happen to them. And Brian is willing to do anything to not let that happen to him, so he decides he's going to break out and go home. He manages to make it outside, but of course there is a fence surrounding the whole school, and he uses his belt to see if anything will happen if he touches the fence, and he was right. Not only does an alarm sound alerting every guardian and the headmaster, but the belt gets electrocuted, so there's no way for him to climb out. Good lord, they're just delinquent kids, man. It's not like you have Bane imprisoned in there. They act like there's like strange scientific robots or cloning experiments going on inside. Luckily, Brian is quick on his feet and he's able to sneak around the guards. Why'd you roll there? Was that your attempt at aura farming or something? It wasn't that good. And since they can't find him outside, the headmaster orders his goons to go door to door and figure out who exactly tried to escape. And as they check every room, Brian climbs his way back into his room with the guards searching for him just inches below his feet. Okay, this guard has to be blind. How do you not see a kid dangling from a window like 4 feet away from you? And it looks like going door to door was a bit of a slow plan because Brian is able to sneak back into his room right before they even know he's missing. The next day, Joe and Brian talk about his failed escape attempt. Joe is smart enough to know that they're not going to let anyone escape that easily. So if Brian wants to make sure he's going to escape, he's going to need a better plan. But before they can discuss a plan, CJ tells Joe that the Guardians told him that he needs to go clean the bathrooms. But it was just a ploy to get Brian alone so he can ask him if he was the one who tried to escape the night before. CJ tells Brian that he's not going to snitch on him for it, but he should really watch out for Joe because Joe is getting a little too close to the staff at the school. And he also noticed that Joe got moved into a new room, a bigger and nicer room. And he's also getting bigger servings during their cafeteria hours, so maybe he snitched on Brian the night before to benefit himself. And he was just asking about Brian's plan just moments ago. That night, Brian once again sneaks out of his room to go to Joe's room to hang out. But Joe is terrified of getting in trouble, so he tells Brian no, they can't hang out and they should stay in their own rooms. But Brian just wanted to talk to Joe and press him about snitching on him and his plan to escape the school. But Joe isn't scared of Brian at all. He isn't going to let anyone intimidate him. Unless it's one of the Guardians, of course. As Brian makes his way back to his room, he stops for a little water break, and he starts hearing strange noises in the halls, and it sounds like it's coming from under the school. He wants to try and investigate more, but they have guards roaming the school at all times now, so he's going to have to be extra sneaky about it. He does make his way to the headmaster's office somehow, and he tries to call his parents, where he notices that the headmaster has tissue samples in a box on his desk, each with labels for kids in the school. Finally, after the phone rings like 15 times, his mom picks up the phone. He begs her to come save him from the school. Something strange is going on, and he just wants to go home. But of course, she doesn't believe him. She thinks he's just playing another prank on her. But he assures her that something strange is happening at the school and she should come get him now. Sadly, Brian gets caught and the headmaster ruins his chances of being saved, all while a guardian makes sure Brian can't scream out in fear. And even worse, the headmaster tells him,
Your program will be accelerated starting tonight.
And even later that night, Brian is sound asleep when someone sneaks into his room, holds him down, and injects him with a mysterious liquid. When Brian wakes up, he's in a daze, strapped to a gurney and being wheeled through the halls of the school. He passes out again, but when he wakes up, he sees through this nauseating vision a bunch of men in surgical masks, measuring him with some pretty strange measuring tools. But in a flash, we see that CJ is shaking Brian, trying to wake him up for class. So that leaves us to wonder if he was really being experimented on last night, or was it all just a strange dream? While they're walking to class, Brian tells CJ everything that happened to him and tells him that it didn't feel like a dream, but he's not entirely sure. Later in class, while they're taking another test, Brian and CJ talk about Joe and how he's always kissing up to the Guardians to get special treatment. They even theorize that Joe is a spy for the school. Again. But a Guardian hears them talking and absolutely crashes out on them.
That's it!
Which gets Brian sent to the headmaster's office, and strangely, Joe is also there. His suspicion of Joe has reached a peak, and he just blatantly asks if he was sent there to spy on him. But Joe claims that he isn't a spy, he's trying to play along to get out of the school quicker. And so far, his plan has been working flawlessly. They praise Joe for being such a great student, and he is the last person they'd expect to try and break out of the school, which he plans on doing tonight. That's why he was asking so many questions about Brian's first escape attempt. And he even invites Brian to join him on his plan to escape, but Brian still doesn't trust him. Then the headmaster comes out and brings Joe in for a little talk, leaving Brian alone in the room, where he begins to hear the strange noises once again. And since he's alone, he takes this opportunity to investigate them. He follows them into this room with almost nothing in it but a desk and a computer. And he notices that the voices can be heard through the vent in the room. And he tries to talk to them, but of course, he doesn't get an answer. This is a really cool callback to earlier in the episode when Brian used the vents in his own house to scare his little brother. But now the sides have turned and he's the one scared of what's on the other side of the vent. Super creative. I love it. I think that's awesome. Since he's already there, Brian decides to just check out the computer on the desk to find any clues on how to escape. Little does he know the computers have been bugged to alert the staff when someone logs in unauthorized. So someone is secretly rushing to him as he dives deeper into the school's files, where he finds out the school has something called a nursery inside, where he tries to check that out, but of course it's blocked. Instead, he looks himself up to see what information they have about him. He kind of Googled himself before Google was a thing. He does find out that his program is 95% complete. He's just missing part of his leg? What? Just then, someone starts slowly twisting the doorknob to the room, and Brian has to think fast or he will be in some deep trouble. But what is there to do? He can't just hide under the desk, and there is nowhere else to hide in this big empty room. So the Guardian busts through the door and he's gone? Somehow, Brian was able to climb into the vents and close them before the Guardian was able to simply open the door? Maybe he should change his name to Barry Allen, because how the hell did he do that? He crawls through the vents to the nearest hallway and he gets to his buddy CJ. He tells CJ that his program is almost complete and he doesn't want to become a mindless zombie like all of the other boys that leave this place. So, just like Joe, he plans on escaping tonight and he lets CJ in on his plan. He tells CJ to meet him in the laundry room later and they'll hide in a pile of clothes and then be carried out of the fence the next day where they can just run back home. But for now, Brian needs a little bit of a distraction to make it back to the headmaster's office undetected. So our boy CJ does exactly that. But sadly, it's a little too late for Brian because the headmaster has already started looking for him. On his way back, Brian gets lost in the labyrinth of hallways in the school. And he's also having to hide because every guard is looking out for him. And to escape the sight of one of the guards, he accidentally finds his way into the nursery and decides to see what's going on in there. First, he finds the room that he thought he dreamed of the night before, with the same measuring tools lying around, and all kinds of science equipment and beakers everywhere. He also finds a clipboard with his name on it and everything you need to know to make a perfect copy of him. Dang, he wears a size 4? Bro has baby feet. I was already a size like 10 or 11 when I was 12 years old. What's wrong with him? He also finds a page for Joe's measurements, but his is completely blank. So either they don't plan on accelerating his program, or he hasn't been kidnapped and measured yet. Next, Brian heads into this other mysterious room, but this one is way stranger than the first one. It's got all kinds of machinery and pipes covering every inch. He spots a button, so obviously he presses it. I just can't resist the urge, which lights up this tank that has a gross looking organ growing inside of it. And the one beside it is even more grotesque and disgusting. He starts to notice that the room is called the nursery because they're growing people inside these tanks. And his suspicions are confirmed when he finds himself in one of the tanks. Clone Brian rips his umbilical cord out, ready to replace him. And the real Brian runs out of the room in fear, all the way back into the hall where he bumps into CJ, who was waiting on him right outside. He tells CJ what he saw inside the nursery and that they're growing kids in the tanks to replace them. At first, CJ doesn't believe him. I mean, it does sound pretty insane, but either way, CJ found a faster and better way to escape this place. So Brian follows him down to this locked room and CJ knows the code. And when they get inside, he's met with a ton of boys behind a single jail cell. It turns out Joe wasn't a spy after all. CJ was. And now Brian is going to join all of these other boys inside the cell and be replaced with his clone. In a fit of rage, Brian attacks CJ and throws him into the cell bars, where the other boys hold CJ down so Brian can escape. But he doesn't make it very far before
Don't fight it.
it turns out that everyone he's been interacting with has been a clone the entire time. And they were all spying on him. But surprisingly, they don't do anything while he runs away. I'm sure at least one of you guys could have stopped him. Hey, is somebody gonna stop him? Anyways, he makes it about 20 more feet when he's approached by his clone, who looks like he just dumped some baked beans on his head or something. They have a bit of a standoff. The other clones might not have been able to stop him, but this one can, and probably does, because the next scene we see is Brian back at home with his family eating dinner. And he's oddly perfect. Even his parents are weirded out by the change in him, but they don't mind it at all. His brother Riley, however, does not like it. And back at the school, Brian is stuck in a jail cell eating the gray sludge I mentioned before. And he tries to convince the guardian that he's actually the clone, not the real Brian. He says the real Brian knocked him out and put him in his clothes and then shoved him into the cell. And that he needs to be let out immediately. And just like sheep, all of the other boys start claiming to be clones as well to get out, which makes the guard not believe him and just ignore him. Then we fade back to Brian at his house doing some homework while being the perfect boy, when his brother comes into the room with a chair superglued to his butt. But perfect Brian couldn't have done that unless he's the real Brian. And the episode ends with Brian hacking into the school's computer system to help all of the other boys escape the hellhole.
It's the last thing I do. I'll get you.
And that's the end of the episode. What a surprisingly great episode. Like I said before, the season 3 episodes are very hit or miss for the series, and thank God this one was a hit. I freaking love it. I would say it's up there with like some of the best episodes in the show. But sadly, you don't hear about this episode a lot, and it's very upsetting. I guess that makes this one of the most underrated episodes in the whole show. Maybe the most underrated episode in the show. And just to clear some things up for those who are still confused about the end of the episode, yes, that is the real Brian. He actually did escape the school. I mean, they kind of just handed him the perfect way to escape. All you have to do is act perfect, and then you throw this guy into the prison cell. They're not gonna know who is who. But yeah, they did an amazing job with the atmosphere in this episode. Before the twist was even revealed, you could feel that something was a little off and tense in the school. I mean, first of all, it feels more like a prison than a juvenile school. And the staff were insanely harsh on the kids, which they might be harsh on them in real life, but I don't know, I was an angel child. All of the guardians moved like robots, not really human, instantly doing whatever the headmaster asked them to do. And the school itself feels massive. The hallways seem like an endless labyrinth, only made to confuse the kids inside and keep them from wandering off too far. The rooms, they all feel huge and they have very little things in them which make them feel even bigger than they are. And there are also rules plastered everywhere on the walls as if they don't have enough rules to follow already. And some of the rules on the walls are a little ridiculous, like no spitting. Who's spitting? Who's hawking loogies everywhere inside of buildings? That's disgusting. And no slouching? What if I want to look like Quasimodo when I'm 60 years old? You can't control me. But yeah, they really did an incredible job with the school. Everything was so bleak and boring looking. They're so overbearing with the rules, it almost feels like you can't breathe at times, unless you're ordered to or something. And honestly, that's kind of what school felt like sometimes as a kid. I can see this episode being a little relatable to kids, especially the ones that find school incredibly boring. It kind of feels like when you have to take a standardized test. You know, they have to take down every poster and clear the whiteboard or chalkboard so there isn't any way of cheating. It feels like that, but like all of the time, which would really suck. I would literally go insane in a place like that. There also seems to be a thunderstorm every night, somehow. But enough about the atmosphere in the school. The twist in this episode is absolutely insane. The story twist is also insane, and yes, they're different. Barely, but they're still different. I knew something was up with the kids, especially with all the mysterious programs being accelerated, but I figured it was some kind of brainwashing program at first, not them cloning everyone. That's crazy. That also can't be profitable. How much is it to send your kid here? $10 billion? And that nursery scene where Brian finds the tanks and they're growing kids, that's probably scarier and one of the more intense scenes in the show. And personally, I think the first two things growing in the tubes are scarier than the clone Brian. Like, what is that? Is that a foot? And in the book, they weren't growing clones, but they were making robots of the children. Perfect little robots. But with clones, the kids would grow up like normal, and robots, would stay the same age. So I'm sure parents would be a little suspicious if their 17-year-old kid looks like a 12-year-old kid. That's kind of a little bit of a difference. And speaking of the book, the episode does a really good job about following the story and adding on to it. But there still are a few differences in the book, like Brian is sent to the school because his parents don't think he's perfect enough, which is kind of brutal. Just say you don't like your kid, man. At least they had a reason in the episode. He was being a jerk to his little brother. And unless I missed something in the story, I don't think Brian has a little brother in the story. He does mess with the family dog at the end though, so you still get a little bit of bullying out of him. And the school is co-ed in the story, not just an all-boys school. But I like that it's an all-boys school in the episode because it makes it feel more prison-like. And of course, the biggest difference is the robots, which I already just talked about like 2 seconds ago. But I do really want to show you the cover for the French version of the book, which gives away the twist, but man, does it look so cool and terrifying. Hi, I'm wearing different clothes now, and I won't explain how it happened. In reality, I realized that I talked a lot about how great the atmosphere and the mise-en-scène of the episode was that I actually never did a proper review of the episode. So here it is. Obviously, I love the episode. There are so many things to love about the episode. The cinematography is great. The story is also really great. All of the changes that they made in the story only elevate it, which really makes me happy. But of course, this episode isn't perfect. Ironically. For one, I think Sean Roberts, the person who plays Brian in the episode, was a little flat acting-wise in this episode. He's definitely gotten a whole lot better throughout the years in acting, but for the majority of the episode, he just gave everyone the Gen Z stare and occasionally looked a little scared. He did get a little better at acting towards the end of the episode, but like I said, for the majority of the episode, there was just like one emotion. Maybe two. And I noticed in my third watch through of the episode that the whole scene in the beginning when he's talking to his parents is ADR. Not a single line he says in the scene was recorded on set. And if you did not notice that before, you definitely will now.
You should be congratulating me on my creativity. Most brothers would have just jumped out of the closet and yelled boo.
I also feel like the episode is a bit slow, and there are definitely some scenes in there that are just to fill time and make the episode a two-parter. Like there's one random scene of Brian just thrashing in bed for a couple of seconds, and they would also drag some scenes out, like when Brian was trying to get back into his room. He was dangling from his windowsill for, no joke, a minute and a half, all while one of the guardians was just fumbling with his keys to try and open the door. Just things like that kind of slow the pacing down of the episode that's already a little slow. And there was also that little incident where he just magically teleported into the vent somehow. That was weird, but other than those few complaints, I think the episode is really solid and overlooked when it comes to some of the best episodes in the series. It might be a little bit of a hot take, but I seriously think this episode is as good as Night of the Living Dummy, Stay Out of the Basement, or Welcome to Dead House. It's just as suspenseful as all of them, and it has a great twist that is a great payoff for the slow pacing in the episode. Stein seemed to also like this idea of cloning kids because there's another episode in his other series, The Haunting Hour, called Perfect Brother, where this exact thing happens in that episode. I just wanted to mention that because people already compared the two episodes in my comments, and I'd love to talk about that episode soon, so if people know about it, maybe they'll start asking for it. And it'll be good for people who haven't seen The Haunting Hour to hear about it. And that's all I've got for you today. I have a Patreon. The $5 members get bonus content plus videos a day early, maybe some pictures of my cats, a Discord server, and your name right here on screen. Like the video if you like the video. Thank you for watching the video all the way through. I appreciate you all, and peace.